Hi, this is Ben Gonzalez. I'm with Premium CBD Labs. Let's talk about Delta-8. This is part one of a two-part video series we're producing about Delta-8. This part is going to focus strictly on the legal and regulatory side of things, and the next video is going to focus on the science. Right now, there's a ton of confusion and ambiguity in the industry surrounding Delta-8 and other isomers. As of the recording of this video, a number of states have already outright banned the sale of it. Other states have restricted the sale to licensed dispensaries, and a number of other states really don't have an opinion one way or the other. Needless to say, the legal landscape on this is quite complex, and while I love policy analysis, we really wanted to rely on some expert opinions to bring some more clarity and hopefully some good perspective as to what's going on. So last week, I had the privilege of having a video conference with two amazing attorneys who focus on cannabis, Marc Hauser and Shane Pennington. Now, I want to be very clear, neither one of these gentlemen, or myself, are presenting any kind of legal advice. I'm going to repeat that. This is not legal advice. This is, however, hopefully some good perspective and some good opinion as to what's going on. So without further ado, here's the conversation I had last week with Marc Hauser and Shane Pennington.
Why don't we start off with Marc? Why don't you tell us what you see on this and where you think the law stands on Delta-8 right now?
I take the position that hemp-derived Delta-8 is almost certainly not legal under the Farm Bill. I agree that there is a way to read the language of the Farm Bill extracting out the appropriate chemicals from hemp and converting that effectively to Delta-8, or even extracting out straight up Delta-8, is there's a plain read of the Farm Bill, which suggests that that may be right. I don't think that's. I think it ignores some of the language in the way that the CSA reads. But I agree that there's enough ambiguity to make you question it. And I think that the hemp industry has hung, its hat on that ambiguity. I think, though, the practical reality and problem is that I don't think that there's any way a federal court is going to allow, if this ever were, prosecuted, a federal court will ever allow a psychoactive substance to be sold freely, without any sort of government regulation. And I also think I don't know what Congress was thinking for sure, but I feel pretty darn sure that nobody in Congress was thinking about making this stuff legal when they were crafting the 2018 Farm Bill. I think it's more of an opportunistic read that I think is maybe more likely than not incorrect, and most definitely would fail in court.
Shane, it seems like you've got a little bit of a different perspective on this, and I'd love to hear what your read on this is too.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me again. I enjoy these conversations, and Marc, good to talk to you again about this. And here we go. Yeah, I think that place to start would be that the 2018 Farm Bill is a more recent and more specific congressional enactment addressing directly the status of hemp and changing some of the relevant definitions of the Controlled Substances Act. And so, I really do think you have to look there when you're trying to, there are many laws that sort of arguably bear on this, but that's the one that is gonna carry the most weight on this issue, I think. And I think that the next step is to just sort of look at the word derived, which isn't a defined term in the statute, but if we're talking about Delta-8 that is derived from hemp as defined under the 2018 Farm Bill, I think it's pretty difficult, honestly, to say that is illegal. And none of these statutes talk about psychoactive properties specifically. That said, I don't want to give short shrift to the point that Marc's making about practical realities, right? It is true that the fact that something is naturally occurring or derived naturally has never kept federal law enforcement agencies from putting people in jail for having it. And so there's this concern, and I want to be very clear that I get that. And I guess that the harder question starts to be, the reality is that a lot of this, the Delta-8 that's out there, and the question that people are really concerned about is when we derive it through, CBD or some other way, and that starts to get into murkier waters that we'd have to address sort of one at a time. And I think, the last thing that I want to say at this point is on the federal court part, I respectfully disagree. It would shock me if a federal prosecutor would bring a case, but if a federal prosecutor did bring a case, that any federal judge would, put somebody in jail, for example, where the status of the law is ambiguous at best, just because when criminal penalties are in play and you have a federal law enforcement agency bringing the case, courts generally want folks to have notice of whether what they're doing is legal or illegal, and not to put too fine a point on it, but without attributing any kind of bad faith to DEA or anything, it's not like it's a secret that people are confused and talking about this a lot. I mean, you'd have to be living under a rock to be DEA and not realize that people would really like to know a very clear, legally binding sort of insight into the agency's view of this and how they intend to treat it. And so without that, which is glaringly absent at this point, I don't think that you could prosecute it. But I'm not a criminal law expert, so perhaps I'm wrong, but that is my view.
I hear all of that, and I agree with a lot of that. I think that the couple of points I go back on are, one, I don't fully buy that just because it's derived from hemp, therefore it makes it okay. Because then what if you extract out something else from hemp and then convert it into Delta-9 and then concentrate the hell out of it? Is that legal? It doesn't seem like that should be legal. But if you take the same read to make the argument that Delta-8 is legal and apply it to that, you get to a sort of an absurd read of it, because there's definitely no way that Congress intended, a synthesized Delta-9 from hemp should be legal. And the counter to that, which some have made, is that, well, the way the statute reads sort of specifies out Delta-9 THC, but I don't think it does. And so that's why I don't think it does. I don't think it does it in a way where it says, okay, any other isomer of Delta-9 is okay, but Delta-9 itself isn't. I don't think the statute properly says that. So I think that you again run into this problem where you could take that argument and create, a Delta-9 concentrate from hemp and say, oh, this is legal. And the other thing too is I think that the DEA, I agree with you, has been somewhat coy. They put out the guidance, or their it wasn't guidance, it was basically their rulemaking effectively at the end of last year or so, about what they called synthetic THC, I think was the term that they used in there. And they could have easily just said, including Delta-8, but they didn't, which was sort of infuriating, because then everybody was trying to figure out, well, what does synthetic mean? And, and there's you read some other guidance from the DEA, which suggests that, if you're changing it in a lab, that's synthesized, so I think you're right. I mean, there hasn't been, I think there's some guidance from the DEA which suggests that they're not going to allow this. And certainly if you ask the DEA and they came out and say, we don't want to allow that, because that's what they're going to do. But I agree, it could be a lot more crystal clear. And then, yeah, I mean, and I also agree with you. I don't think a prosecutor probably brings this case unless somebody gets hurt by it. And at that point, it's probably more likely at the state level, and we can talk about sort of state things that are coming up about it, which have been in the news. But but I agree with you. I mean, generally, I would bet that the federal prosecutors are not going to bother with this unless somebody's either trafficking in it at a very large quantity or people start getting hurt by it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there, and I do want to sort of run through the bullet points,
Yeah,
just
sorry.
because there. No, it's it's great. We can cover a lot quickly in this kind of format, which is nice. Kind of get down to it, right? So, just let's see. So on the first point about synthetic Delta-9, I mean, synthetic Delta-9 is not a Schedule 1 substance. I mean, it is in fact sold by pharmaceutical companies in various forms. It's a Schedule 3 to Schedule 5 substance, depending on its dosage. So, like, even if I spot you the idea that the argument that Delta-8 is, allowing Delta-8 to be derived in this way, or to derive Delta-9 from something and therefore make it legal under the 2018 Farm Bill, would be absurd. Absurdity is not necessarily tantamount to illegal in this, or wrong in this context. I mean, there are a lot of things about this that many sort of don't pass the sniff test for me, but unfortunately, that's sort of the water we're swimming in. And I'm not sure it's so. I mean, if I have to pick my absurd world, if I'm Alice and I get to choose which rabbit hole I'm going to jump down, I'd rather jump down one where the words of the statute matter, and where the formal processes and rule of law are strictly applied, especially in the context of criminal, where there are criminal penalties involved. And, it's sort of a silly conversation to have, because we are, again, choosing a menu of absurdities. It is like Lewis Carroll's, dinner or something. But still, I think that underneath everything that we're like arguing about is this sort of, I'm playing the skeptic, I'm playing like goaltender of truth here, like, no, show me why it's illegal. And you're saying, no, you're being practical. And, as a lawyer, if people call me, which happens all the time, and they're wanting to talk about what is their risk exposure with, Delta-8 in various ways, it's the conversation doesn't go like this, right? It goes, well, you're in a state where it's illegal. So there's that, A, right?
Yeah.
And then B, we're talking about something that's being marketed for human consumption in various ways. Even if we remove the CSA altogether and DEA just like said, you know what, we all simultaneously retire, we're done, we've had enough of this nonsense, you would still have the FDCA, and you would have various sundry, unless you're totally intrastate, which good luck. I'm not going to get into all of that, but if you're wanting to market something in interstate commerce, which it appears folks want to do, then, there are laws that are going to make, if we solved all of these riddles, there would just be more riddles, right? So I'm fighting you on these little turf battles, but when you get down to the practical core of it, I'm not so far probably from where you are. I do think that it's important for this industry, and for everybody in every industry, and just people, to demand clarity and adherence to transparency and regulatory norms, particularly, again, I keep saying it, but when criminal penalties are involved.
I absolutely agree with that. I agree. I don't think we're very far apart. I do want to clarify two things. One, the FDCA does have, it does say interstate commerce, but in the case law, it does show that the FDA is pretty good about finding interstate commerce, even if you're intrastate. You use an email or a phone, you're going to be tagged with it, most likely. So yeah, and so that it's an interesting defense that does, that's like, that in practicality, the courts are going to find whatever they want, to find, that's the whole basis for the dormant commerce clause. It's a court made, doctrine. So, I don't remember the last thing I want to point out then is just I don't remember about the synthetic, and I want to reserve the right to go back on that on where it is on the. I just don't remember where it is on the what do you call it, the list of schedules. But I do, but I think your point though, and this sort of gets to the point about where the states are coming out is that I agree with you 100% that what all this means is that there's a risk in doing this because of all the ambiguity in this. And yeah, it may be that that all of this is okay. It may also be that none of this is okay from a federal perspective. And and the states are really now starting to weigh in on it more. There was the article in Hemp Industry Daily, I think 2 days ago, about how more and more states are starting to change their laws. I think it's 8 states already banned Delta-8 derived from hemp, and I think there were maybe 6 or 7 others sort of stories listed about other states proposing bans on it, or saying you only can sell it in a regulated dispensary. There's pushback from the hemp industry, but states are starting to, I think, are starting to recognize that that this is out there, and that and that it's being sold as an unregulated, untested product.
Speaking of the states, because that's a whole different issue. I mean, I started approaching you guys about like, well, what's federally going on here. But what's happening in the states is a really interesting thing that's happening right now with a number of these states creating these laws or these regulations that are clearly either strictly, restricting the sale of Delta-8 or outright banning it. What do you think is the motivator behind the state legislatures or the state regulators in putting these things forward?
Again, I go back to, I think that they are realizing that there is a psychoactive product being sold on an unregulated basis in retail stores. I mean, the city of Chicago, there was it was called, well, I probably shouldn't name the name because I don't want to, but there was a store where, it was a bakery where you could buy Delta-8 laced, laced I realize is a loaded word, infused products. And it was just a retail store. And it was, and that, and to me, that is a bit surprising. And I think that creates, I hope for their sake, their insurance is very high. And I worry that, and I think that, it's viewing that kind of product, and they're probably getting pressure from the licensed cannabis industry saying, why are you allowing, we're paying all these extra taxes. We're being as compliant as we possibly can be to sell these things in a responsible manner. Why are you allowing, psychoactive products to be sold, down the street that are unregulated and untested?
I think this is speculation. I'm not familiar with the folks who are regulating at the state level, and I guess a shot in the dark is many of these states have booming hemp industries, Delta-8 aside, and they have partnered in a cooperative federalism regime with federal regulators, most notably the United States Department of Agriculture, under the 2018 Farm Bill, to work to get this industry blown and going, and so far so good, right? And if you have really put a lot of effort, and many people are relying on this burgeoning thing, and there's one part of it that is drawing questions and raising eyebrows and so forth. You're going to have some who are going to look at that and say, you know what, let's just ride. Let's hitch our wagon to these hemp stars, right? And let's take the questionable one and set it aside. That would be, not a crazy thing for some states in certain situations, maybe, to think. I have no idea if that's what's going on. It could just be straight up, just realizing that they don't fully understand this, So they may have thought, well, this is just marijuana, right? This is just Delta-9, and then they realize, well, it's not Delta-9. Well, what is it? We're not sure. And if they're not savvy, and this stuff the chemistry is getting more and more complicated by the day, and sometimes I think there has been in different states I've heard reports that it's difficult to test, difficult to measure, difficult to know and rely on what little we do have. Some regulators are going to say, listen, we're going to have to hit pause on this. And look, others haven't. It's important to note that, and not everybody here is, we're not talking about all bad actors, all good actors. There's a mixed bag. And we have this like genius innovation called federalism in our country, and the states are the laboratories of democracy. And, the good news is that we don't have to know why they're doing it to benefit from the experiments that they're running right now. And because we're going to get to watch them play out and how these different regulations run, and it'll work itself out as it always does.
That brings up an interesting question, and I'm gonna, as I said, I'm gonna keep this short. I want to keep this under half an hour if I can, just because I have to edit this down.
Poor guy.
But so this will be probably my final question, and I want to give each of you a chance to respond to this. Looking 1, 3, 5 years down the road, what do you forecast for Delta-8? But also, we're seeing a lot of other cannabinoids pop up right now. Delta-10 being another hot button these days. Delta-6 is being researched, and they find more cannabinoids every day, pretty much. What do you think is going to be happening down the road on the federal level and on the state level? What do you want to see happen down the road?
Those are two, want and expect are two very different things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Shane, do you want to take a stab at that first, or would you like me to?
Sure, if you like. I have such a bad crystal ball. It's been broken since since the Houston Rockets were last in a NBA championship. So I guess that what I expect to happen is that this substance will be regulated at both the state and federal level. I suspect that as long as it is profitable and there's demand for it, and as long as there's not some record of people, having horrible experiences that are costly in lives and resources and so forth, that it will be regulated, and it will be in commerce one way or another. I suspect that probably we will keep some level of federalism involved here. In other words, there won't be some top-down federal standard. There will be federal standards, just like there are with so many things, but the states will still be allowed some way to design their own programs, because they've gone so far now, and there's enough diversity, and there are enough people bought in, that the federal government and everyone involved is probably going to want to not throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so I suspect that is what it's going to probably look like. What do I want it to look like? I want it to look like what you want it to look like. I want nothing to do with making decisions that affect anybody but myself and my daughter. Not even my wife. I'm constantly just telling my wife, like, listen, I'm sorry that you're having to put up with the consequences of my actions. So I would never weigh in on that. Not my style.
I would say I come from a similar place. I think that that Delta-8 and the other sort of isomers all eventually get regulated by the states, and then eventually, if there's legalization, by the federal government. And I think that all gets hopefully cleared up, because I think that the industry has always pushed the boundary and is used to dealing with the fact that it's an illegal business. And so what's the risk of being cavalier when it's already illegal? Which is not a good way to run a business, but it's also, in a way, what the industry has had to put up with for a very long time. Ever since there's been state legal cannabis. I agree with Shane. I think that I think that this looks a lot like some sort of federalism. A little bit of the way that alcohol is regulated, where there is sort of loose regulation at the top, at the federal government, primarily to make sure that it gets taxed and licensed, with some basic oversight, but a lot of the responsibility, I agree, it probably ends up at the states, and you might have some states that don't even have it, and so, but the federal government's fine with that. So yeah, I sort of, we'll see if that actually ends up happening within the next 12, 18 months. But yeah, I think that you probably end up, like Shane said, something very similar to, of a federalist sort of approach to it. What would I like to see? I actually think that would be a good answer. I think you want to build in some, a lot more protections, to the way, to the extent you can, to make sure that, that there, I don't know how to do it exactly, but, dealing with social equity issues that are being raised right now, making sure that, the taxes are a little more sane, so that, the cost of the federal compliance isn't greater than what they're paying under 280E right now, things like that. But to me, that federalist approach, I think it will work pretty well. It's going to be painful when it finally happens for a long time, but in the long run, I think it's, it works for other industries.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for presenting these. Once again, this is not legal advice at all. Anyway, this is not legal advice. We are also not endorsing any products or endorsing any substances, or saying that you should or shouldn't do these things. Just trying to provide a little bit of explanation of where things might stand right now. And from the sound of it, we really don't know.
Productive meeting, guys.
Thanks again to Marc Hauser and Shane Pennington for coming together to have this conversation with us. We hope you got some clarity and some perspective as to what's going on. The next part of this video series is going to focus on the science of Delta-8. We hope you have a chance to watch that as well. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to us at premiumcbdlabs.com. Thanks for watching.